Thank you very much, Ayu. So we're turning tack a little bit for this session and looking at innovation within and at central banks. So central banks play a crucial role in ensuring monetary and financial stability, and to achieve those goals they rely on various technologies for data, supervisory analysis, to payments and settlement systems. And as we've been hearing in the conference, blockchain, artificial intelligence and machine learning are developing fast. So central banks need to deal with those different technologies at different levels, analysing their impact on monetary policy and financial stability, potentially adjusting regulation and deploying them in their own organisations. As Augustine Carsten said yesterday, central banks need to be in the driving seat and steer the direction of innovation. So how can central banks adjust and use innovation in their own operations to address new challenges that are particularly relevant in these times of uncertainty, and what are the risks and benefits? Can innovation help them to better monitor markets, involve payment infrastructure, implement monetary policy and enhance forecasting tools? And how can they develop the skills necessary in those central banks to foster that culture of innovation? So we have a lot to cover in this session. So let me introduce the panel before we start the discussion. So Margarita Delgado is Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Spain. She's a member of the Supervisory Board of the European Central Bank Single Supervisory Mechanism, the Council of the Spanish National Securities Markets Commission and the Macro Prudential Authority. Pablo García Silva is Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Chile and Chair of the Irving Fisher Committee on Central Bank Statistics of the BIS. He served as Executive Director, Chief Economist and Director of Research as well. Changchun Mu is the Director General of the People's Bank of China Digital Currency Institute. He's a member of the BIS Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, the Financial Innovation Network of the FSB, the IMF High Level Group and the BIS Innovation Network. And finally, let me introduce Sunaina Tuteja. She's the newest central banker on our panel and the first person to fill the newly created role of Chief Innovation Officer at the US Federal Reserve Board. Previously, she was in charge of leading change and innovation at the nexus of finance, technology and policy in a number of roles, most recently as Global Head of Emerging Tech and Strategic Partnerships at TD Ameritrade. So with those introductions out of the way, I want to first discuss with you all how central banks are steering the innovation process, what kind of role technological innovations play in the operations now and in the future. And if I could turn to Margarita first, major developments have happened in the last year for central banks. Following the pandemic, we've had war and energy price shocks. We've had turmoil in the crypto industry, and more recently we've had issues in the banking sector as well. So how have these external events impacted on the push for innovation? Has it intensified the process for central banks, or has it slowed it down?
Thank you very much, Jill, for having me here. I mean, this is a great forum, of course, to share some thoughts on how digital innovation might be evolving, of course, might be playing a role in this, let's say, uncertain landscape. I think, first of all, of course, I think we need trust. And this is for the whole society, but we are the central bankers and we need to try to help society with the trust and the confidence. And I think that confidence is key for the financial system. As you mentioned, of course, the crypto winter and also the very recent turbulences with the banking system. So first of all, I think that we have to cope with our main objective. So having said that, and coming back to your question on the digitalization and innovation, first of all, I think that as our main objective, of course, is to preserve the financial stability, we need to be adaptive to the environment and also be knowledgeable of what is going on out there, right? So I think, first of all, central bankers need to understand what the ecosystem needs and wants, and also really to apply everything that we know, using every tool that we have in order to really take the right decisions. For example, I'm sure that you've discussed at length today, all the questions around the potential contribution of to the digital euro investigation. I think that these innovations can really contribute to promoting the smooth operation in the payment system. So I think this is something that we have and something that we need to take advantage of, right? Secondly, as very recent cases just testified, I think there are many challenges for the supervisors now, many challenges and many tools and many opportunities for the supervisors. So from the project Gaia to, any kind of application that maybe we can discuss it a bit later, that we have just started to apply in our, let's say, SSM, in the supervisory mechanism, the single supervisory mechanism, and these elements might help supervisors to really grasp the environment, the difficulties, the risks, and take the right decisions. And this leads me maybe to another aspect, which is the human aspect. We are now really, suffering or living challenging times for our staff in order to keep the pace with the different innovations and the different items around it. So, but not only advanced skills or upskilling the people that we already have, but we will also, as central bankers, as managers, will have to really take managerial decisions in many fronts. So those are really challenges that we are now facing in. But anyway, answering to your concrete question, we cannot, leave the opportunity to really keep pace with the innovation.
Thank you very much, Margarita. I think you make a very, very relevant point as well about our own staff keeping pace as well in these times. Turning to Pablo, the Central Bank of Chile has recently laid out a very broad programme to build a sound regulatory framework and improve financial market infrastructures. So with that programme in mind, what technologies are you using to achieve those goals in that programme?
Thanks, Jill. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've learned a lot, I think, during these days. And the first reflection that I have is more of a sort of high-level approach on this, that technological innovation, the way we try to implement it at Central Bank, is not only about tech, but it's also about people and culture. We'll talk maybe more about that on the second round. And also, it's not about doing new things for the sake of doing new things, but maybe doing old things in a new way that helps precisely what you mentioned we are trying to do to improve our grasp of financial stability and monetary policy. So just let me give you a couple of examples. One is that pushing for more data sources. We've managed to get a pretty close relationship with other agencies at the government level to gather very granular data at the individual level, at the firm level, and persons level, allowing us to detect and evaluate very precisely what is going on in terms of all the heterogeneity in the Chilean economy. Of course, this has a lot of implications regarding privacy, so we had to change our way of dealing with data in the sense of having a single point of entry, having a data governance committee, having a technological program to improve our management of databases, for the sake of preventing the migrating of databases in individual laptops or leakage towards non-authorized users. So this is a very traditional approach of trying to get better information, but has allowed us to get, for instance, almost weekly estimates of economic activity with only a few days lag. So it's a much more precise sense of what is going on with the business cycle. We get now the ability to merge data on credit conditions and debt conditions of households with their employment history, with their income history, even with their consumption history, because we have all the information on the electronic invoicing that goes on in the economy, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one example of how you need to change both your technological providers and also the way you approach the coordination of data within the central bank to avoid silos. The second example is payments, and I think I liked a lot what I heard yesterday from Cecilia and from Christine Lagarde regarding how you approach the innovations in terms of payments. So why do you want to innovate in terms of payments? Why do we think this is important? On the one hand is because we want to preserve the fiat money system. I think that is a very important concept. And we want to preserve the integrity of the peso payment system in particular. So why is this important? Because the ghost of dollarization is always there. It's something that's pretty absent in Chile, but you see in the region in Latin America, dollarization is a very common situation. So the ghost of having people, because of the use of ease of use and because of simplicity, shifting towards a non-peso based payment system is actually quite risky. And in that sense, I think we've benefited from three structural characteristics in our case. One is that for the last about 20 years, the state-owned bank managed to create side accounts for essentially everybody. So now we have 90% of the population that have side accounts that are free. They are linked to your national ID number that you get 2 days after you're born and will accompany you until you die. So it's a single ID for everything. Now, that coupled with the fact that electronic transfers from checking accounts have become quite common between commercial banks, and what we are doing now is try to improve the clearing of those payments and improve the sort of solvency of that process. We are moving towards open banking, therefore thinking about the explanation about what is going on in India, to create a third layer of innovation with private providers that complements what the private system is doing. And we've also explored the possibility of the issuance of a CBDC, although I have to say that given the current situation that we have, there are many other things that we need to develop first. Push for cross-border convertibility of the peso, for instance, and then also improve on fast payments, which I think we are quite along the way to improve on that dimension. But definitely a CBDC can be a possibility in the future, but first we need to make more robust these other areas.
That sounds like a very large program of work. So it maybe begs the question then, with all of these developments within the organization, then how are you developing the skills of and the competencies of your staff to move with all these changes?
So this is actually quite interesting because it's not a matter just for human resources.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a very cross-cutting theme. Yeah. You need to organize cross-area groups that work on these different issues, on payments, on the CBDC, on data. You not only need people that are in statistics or monetary policy or financial stability, you need to create these sort of cross-cutting areas. And also, in terms of the skills, you need to upskill people. You need to train people on data management. You need to train them on new software. Offer the possibility to do this to the current staff. Be careful when you hire new people also. We are also lucky that in contrast with other central banks in the region, we are subject to the common labor code and not the public administration. Okay. So this gives you a lot more flexibility regarding hiring, firing, managerial decisions, incentives, bonuses. You can be way more competitive than if we were part of the public sector.
Okay, that's very interesting, and it may be a topic we'll turn to later, which is kind of retention of all of these skills. Turning to you, Mr. Mood, the survey that we did, and thank you everybody for participating in the survey prior to the summit here, showed that looking into the future, right? So 50% of the respondents expect blockchain to become widely and significantly adopted in the financial sector by 2026, and then almost 85% of them believed that would be significant in 10 years' time. So at the Digital Currency Institute, you've been advancing these technologies for some time. Do you share this view? And do you think that central banks should try to adopt these technologies at the same speed as the private sector?
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for having me here today. I have read the survey that the survey shows that the DLT or so-called blockchain is expected to be widely adopted by the financial industry. Well, the new technology definitely is a very strong driving force for the financial innovation. And DLT definitely is very suitable for non-real-time, low frequency and less sensitive business use cases, such as registry or confirmation of property rights or securities settlements. That very suitable for those business cases. But of course, there are some concerns and doubts about the capacity, scalability, or the finality issue or concerns for the application of DLT in the payment system. For example, for our core system, the ECNY, we actually don't use DLT for the core system because the capacity or scalability definitely cannot meet the retail requirements in China. We have such a big population and so big, high concurrency requirements. Definitely DLT cannot meet that. But for the reconciliation part of our system, we do use DLT. So having said that, it's important to note the potential risks deriving from the centralized momentum in DLT applications. Just like Stephen yesterday, he said that we witnessed several major events in the crypto turmoil last year. For example, the FTX incidents. So we can see from those events that the application of DLT in DeFi is actually not truly decentralized. The source code management, computing power, and network organization, even the technology path selection, all the governance of DLT application are actually more centralized managed instead of decentralized managed, as opposed. So actually the DeFi provides those financial services through issuance of stablecoin and the smart contract, but the stablecoin actually are issued by a centralized managed fintech firm, and the smart contract also triggered will be by a centralized managed fintech firm. And also a stablecoin actually a centralized issued by a fintech firm with a centralized backed pool of assets or establishing algorithms, which will risk concern of transparency and price manipulation. And moreover, the smart contract codes actually require assessment and update and maintenance from a centralized party. So all those, with this centralized momentum in the application of DLT and DeFi, looks more like a decentralization from the regulated financial institutions or the central banks, and re-centralized in the under-regulated financial institutions. So it may raise the concern that re-centralization of the DeFi below the radar of the supervision could bring liquidity risk, market risk, or the concerns of M and CTF. It took the financial industry hundreds of years to realize that centralized management and regulation is required to mitigate the financial risks and iron out the financial cycle. Those central banks take the responsibility of the issuance of fiat money and the operation of the payment system. The central bank also performed the lender of the last resort, and the CCP are created to mitigate the default risk of OTC transactions. So while DLT could be, as I said, could be adopted in many market niche or business use cases, especially in the case of P2P or peer-to-peer network organization with mutual trust issues, just like we deploy blockchain or DLT technology in our Enbridge project, which is more suitable in that use case. As long as DLT is well managed and supervised, the advantage of DLT could be maximized in the above market niche. So we, the central bank community and the financial industry, have to deepen the research on the DLT technology and to deploy the right technology in the right use cases, and also under the prudential and timely regulation. So the central bank are also responsible to make joint efforts to establish a regulatory framework of the DLT application in DeFi under the guidance of BS and other international standard setting bodies. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jiangtung, and I think it's very important to have that central bank perspective given your experience in this regard. So turning to you, Sunaina, the Fed created this new role that you now hold of Chief Innovation Officer, and you mentioned once the key to innovation in central banks is to create the perfect blend of the bold and the boring. Now, I'm reminded of a slogan that I once saw in the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch central bank, about 10 years ago, and it actually said on one of the slogans, "We aim to be boring." So thinking of technological innovation, what is the bold and what is the boring?
Thank you, Jill. So this is my second trip to the BIS in the last 3 months, and as somebody coming from crypto who now works with central bankers, I can tell you, you are not boring. So, I think whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, having led change and transformation, I keep coming back to the thesis that in order to advance innovation that's actually meaningful in terms of the outcomes and the value it delivers, it has to be predicated on kind of this eclectic combo of the bold and the boring. Oftentimes you think of innovation and, it's like eureka moments and unicorns and rainbows. That may happen in movies, but I think as innovators in this room, you'll all attest that it takes a lot of hard work. It's a lot of grit. It's getting laughed out of a lot of rooms when you first pitch an idea, or people rolling their eyes because they're like, what are you talking about? So, and when I joined the Fed in the middle of the pandemic, and I, my first 100 days set out to meet as many people as I could, which was the only nice thing about the pandemic because you didn't have to go anywhere physically. I talked to over 800 people within the Federal Reserve System in my 100 days. And, I asked all of them the same 3 questions. What does innovation mean to you from your span of control within the Fed? What do you hope that the person in this role will do, which got all kinds of answers depending on what book they were talking. And what is the one thing you fear that the person in this role would do? And that got a very consistent answer, which we'll get to. But on the first question, what I picked up was, again, there was a diversity of perspectives of what innovate, because if you talk to our colleagues in Soup and Reg versus payments versus policy, everybody had their own views of what innovation, how it could manifest. But what I sensed that it was the word innovation was also very anxiety-inducing, right? Oh my God, we're a central bank, we're expected to innovate. It's like in my year-end review, but I don't know what to do. And it's not that different, and you're all nodding, right? And it's not that different from the private sector. And in order to kind of reduce that anxiety and hopefully help people know that you're actually doing it already, what we really started to is parse out the notion that at its substrate, innovation is change management and problem solving. I think we can all attest we do that pretty much every day, regardless what our span of control is. And I think breaking that down became very important, and I could just feel like this overall sigh, oh, okay, I can do this, right? And then it was about how do you now start to define it so that the innovation that we're leading is less about chasing shiny objects or FOMO-driven innovation, fear of missing out, and it's more about putting those singles on the board and really driving utility and value for the institution. So the way I characterize, bold and the beautiful, not the soap opera.
That's the central bankers.
See, I might have been inspired. No, I'm just kidding. So the way I would maybe parse out is, 5 components. One, I think it behooves all of us to really walk the talk about innovation has to be evergreen, right? It's not something that comes in and out of style. And I know the theme of this conference was innovation during uncertainty. And next time, can we not actually have that much uncertainty? Boring is okay. But if you think about innovation, when budgets are tight, when there's a lot of uncertainty, what's the first line item people go to, right? And I think we all as leaders have a role to actually say, no, it is during times of uncertainty, the unknown, the chaos, is when innovation is the most important, right? It's when your budgets are tight, you actually want to lean into innovation because it can help you drive efficiencies and optimization, right? It's when there's a lot of unknown unknowns around you and you need to solve that Rubik's Cube, is when you need to flex new muscle memory and new mental models, which is innovation. So I think that's an important component, that, innovation can't be this volatility curve. It should be something that's going up and to the right consistently. And at the Fed, one of the other things we've instituted is really running innovation like a true business discipline. We use OKRs, objectives and key results, for those of you who are familiar, because again, even if we're not shipping widgets every day that can be quantified, we owe it to the organization to say, for every investment that you make in innovation, this is the value accrued back to you, right? And in the form of OKRs. And the other good thing about OKRs is it does a really good job of showing interconnectedness, right? I would hazard a guess that none of you who drive innovation in your institution are doing it in a silo in your own little corner. You're creating collaborative webs across your organization, and that's another reason OKRs can help drive that accountability. And I mean, I sound like the most uninnovation officer talking about OKR, but that's the boring part in order to ship those bold wins. I think the other component is really putting forth the notion that innovation is a team sport. So that third question that I asked over 800 colleagues, what is the one thing you fear that the person in this role would do? Oh, you're gonna move my cheese. I mean, everybody said it in their own way. You're gonna suck up all the innovation and it's all gonna be top down. We're not gonna have the ability. And in fact, that's an anathema to innovation, right? The best innovation comes from our colleagues who are closest to the end process, the end product, and the end customer. So again, making sure that we're running innovation as a business, but as a team sport, but with clear accountability of who's standing tall on what. And I think that alludes to what Pablo said around, culture and talent. Again, not very sexy, but very boring and important to drive bold innovation outcomes. I think the other thing I would say is we also have to really tease out the narrative that innovation can be agnostic of technology, right? I know that might be a very contrarian view, considering this is the process of technological innovation, because I think, again, that can be anxiety-inducing, and it can actually leave a lot of people out. Like the number of people, well, I don't work in technology. Well, who cares? Like, if you are, an examiner, you know more about supervision than I will ever learn, and you probably know where there are points of friction. And where there's friction, there's an opportunity for innovation. So I think kind of helping people tease out that it doesn't always need to start with technology. In fact, it's better if it doesn't, that it should start with problem statements and personas and, the derivative value. And then you're right, we can use a database or we can use DLT, but we can worry about that later. And I think the notion that innovation is life in perpetual beta. One thing I've picked up about central bankers is you strive for the ultimate perfection, and until a document has gone through 1,822 reviews and every grammar check, it can't be published. And I think in that culture, as leaders, we again have to help people understand that it's about progress, not perfection, right? We're interrogating new technologies like DLT, blockchain. We talked about ChatGPT-4, AI, machine learning. There's no playbook. It's akin to building the plane while you're flying the plane, which means it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, because again, you can never ship those bold, innovative changes if you're so afraid of perfection, and so, striving for progress. And then the last thing I would submit is I think making it very clear that ultimately innovation is about shipping. And it's about the end person, end consumer, whether it's an internal user or external user, kind of goes, wow, you just made my life simple, fast, and easy, right? And so even if it's not perfect, and sometimes you have to get the results out in the wild, because that's when in the lab, in a simulated environment, everything can be perfect, but it's when it goes in the wild that you really kind of start to understand how you continue to level up that product and kind of that innovation that you've delivered. So I think that's how I might characterize. Those might all sound very boring, but if we do those things very consistently, the last thing I'll just add, in terms of the evergreen innovation, because you're also all leaders that probably, make decisions around resources in your organization, is innovation cannot be cheap and cheerful. There's only so much your teams can do with like limited budget or no resources. That as leaders, we also have to make sure that if we are expecting transformational change with innovation, which we've all talked about, that we're also making sure that we're investing in it appropriately, whether enabling time for the talent, whether it's capital, whether, do we have the right skills in our organization? Are we helping them level up those skills? And I think that's an important component, because sometimes there's a delta between the rhetoric of we want you to innovate, but then there's no follow through in terms of the reality of here's how we're going to invest so innovation becomes real. So I think if we do those boring things very consistently and apply the mental model of evergreen innovation, progress over perfection. So you're trying to make me a central banker, but also adopting things that we know work in the private sector, whether it's design thinking or Scrum and Agile. And I'm walking away from this conference very inspired, going, wow, central bankers are not that boring. Like, actually, you guys have leaned in very aggressively in adopting a lot of these techniques, not just in rhetoric, but in action. So I think just doing those repeatedly will ensure that we'll see more great projects that, we were briefed on over the last day and a half.
Great, thank you very much, Sunaina, and it gave us a real insight into how you're doing that across the Federal Reserve System as well. And maybe staying on that topic of innovation within the central bank, I've been to the Banco de España recently and seen all that you're doing in terms of your own innovation team. You're kind of plugged into now the BIS, Eurosystem Hub, you have your own domestic projects, you have the sandbox as well, and you're working with other kind of public authorities. So I'm curious to understand at the Banco de España, as was having listened to the Federal Reserve System example, how do you manage all of these projects? How do you coordinate them? And how do you kind of keep momentum when you're trying to prioritize all these different projects?
Of course, I mean, you can imagine that this is really challenging. Of course, I mean, you need to keep momentum and also increase the effectiveness and agility of the team. So it's really complex. Well, first of all, we started with a strategic plan. And one of the pillars of the strategic plan was really, to set up a kind of a digital transformation program, which is something that's totally across the board through the whole organization. And it counts with a kind of material team in charge of data scientists, and also we set up a digital transformation office, which is, I guess, it's very similar to what the Fed has just done. And in that digital transformation office, we will probably plug in the new chief data officer. So we are in central banks, we are sitting on a chunk of data, a chunk of really granular data. Specifically in Spain, we deal with a big amount of figures, data, not only for the macroeconomic projections, but also coming from the banks and for statistical reasons. So I think we need to try to put some order there. So we are now building up those skills for the people, and through upskilling, as I mentioned, but also through hiring new people in order to get there. I think that also we have built a precise network in terms of cybersecurity, and we are, on top of our agenda, because once you open up your innovation and you transform digitally the organization, you need to really have a very good, let's say, cyber security framework, because if not, honestly, probably you can lose everything in just a single moment. You mentioned also the regulatory sandbox. I think this is not boring. I think I wouldn't say that the teams get fun with the sandbox, but they really learn a lot, because this is a public-private initiative, which is really interesting, really important. Let me just give you some flavor on what we are seeing out there. We have completed several trials and different tests with almost 20 projects throughout the last 2 years or so. And it has proven to be a very fertile ground to touch base with market players, indeed, on quite a broad range of initiatives, from blockchain, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, or biometric authentication. Some of them from the fintech community, but many from the banking system. I mean, very well established and big banks. They are really investing money on this type of initiative. So I think this is really important. And this has proven to be, I mean, just a kind of unique investigation and source of really knowledge for the teams. Also, we have committed to the researching and experimenting together with other central banks, for example, on the wholesale CBDC. Also, we are investing people, time and money on that, and also we are collaborating internationally in different projects with other organizations, which, by the way, I think cooperation at international level is key here as well.
Absolutely, and I think when we hear the many points about interconnectivity and learning from each other, which is one of the very valuable things we can do in the central banking community. I suppose listening to Margarita talking about collaboration with the private sector, and also we've many private sector participants here in our audience today. You talked about fintechs, you talked about the banking system. And Pablo, in the Central Bank of Chile, what kind of private sector collaboration are you looking at to deliver your projects?
So thinking about that, I guess there's a first stage, which is public-public partnership.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's very important to engage because of, again, cultural reasons, to engage with our regulators, to engage with our authorities, because sometimes, especially in the payments area, it involves a number of different agents. We had a conference here on regulating big techs a few weeks ago. It highlighted the fact that in the new environment, there is antitrust, there is data protection, right? There is financial stability. So you need to have kind of a holistic approach so as to engage everybody within the public sector in these initiatives. And on the public-private, I think there is an interesting angle here, which has to do a bit with the boring versus the bold, right? That if you are, for instance, thinking about engaging with the private sector, and you have your head of regulation spearheading that, the private sector will say, well, why are you asking this, right? What are the scope of this? Are you going to sort of hit me with a hammer after I come up with a new idea? So what we managed to do, and has been very useful, is to, a bit like what the BIS is doing, is create what we call a technological observatory, which depends on the financial stability area, but is separate from the line. So you don't have the people writing the codes, having also being engaged in terms of what can you do with the private sector, but you have a separate area which have more leeway to investigate, who has more initiative to learn what is going on else in the world, and therefore when they engage with the private sector, when they convene forums and they invite different participants, the dialogue that arises is very transparent, very open, and therefore there's a free flow exchange of ideas. We found that has been extremely useful to engage productively into this and not create sort of the fear of after you meet, you go away, and then you hit me with something that will prevent me from innovating. So I think that's been very useful.
So that sounds like a good consultative process. So good to hear, Pablo. Maybe looking to the future, Chang Chung. So within your organization, your organization's been working on these issues for some time, but looking to the wider organization, there's maybe two questions. One, what kind of culture would you like to see in 5 years' time in your own central bank? And then a second question, which we were discussing, which was not only skills, but also retaining staff. So what do you do to retain staff when you're competing, obviously, with the private sector, with kind of public roles? So.
Well, that's definitely not a boring topic, but it's, it's a very tough question to me. I remember actually the creator of Linux, Linus, ever said that talk is cheap, show me the code. Well, definitely we have to talk first. Then we can have the code. That means we have to change the culture first, and then we can have some real result. In the future, I would like to see. Actually, we have witnessed some encouraging results so far. That is the culture change in my organization, which is DCI. It's become more market-oriented. As all all we know that we hope actually our central bankers are very market-oriented, because we have to respond to the market pressure, like recent days. With the development of mobile payment, the paper banknotes are less popular and are actually diminishing from the public eyes as a retail payment instruments provided by the central bank. We have to be more market-oriented and upgrade the central bank payment system to satisfy the demand of the market, and in accessing the central bank money as a retail payment instrument. So in the paper banknote era, the central bank only take care of the responsibility of minting and printing. And the circulation actually will be taken care of by the commercial banks and the private sectors. However, for the development of a CBDC system in the future, and currently we have to cooperate with private sector, and we have to co-develop the system with the commercial banks, with the private sectors, including PSPs, commercial banks, and even telecom operators. So although in the two-tier model, the retail transactions are still taken care of by the private financial institutions, but we have to, as a central bank, we have to respond to the retail market capacity requirements and the functional demands. Like this morning, people ask what is the TPS capacity of the bridge. We have to answer that question, respond to that capacity pressure from the market. Also for example, we in Chinese society, we have the custom to send red packets during the Chinese New Year to show the goodwill and send good wishes, like you send Christmas card during Christmas. So this time we launched our P2P red packets function right before the Chinese New Year holiday to meet the market requirements. So we have to be more market-oriented. Secondly, we hope that we can be more user-oriented. Although the CBDC will still be legal tender, but we cannot make a mandatory request that every citizen have to use our CBDC instead of other electronic payments instruments. You cannot do that. So we have to make our CBDC more appealing and more user-friendly to satisfy the market needs, to make make it easier adoption by the market. So I remember a slogan from Nokia. Nokia is a very great company. I remember that when you turn on the Nokia phone, you will see a slogan, connecting people. So we share the same value in our CBDC system and development, and the users and people will be always the center of our system. So we every day actually we are collecting comments from every source of feedback, including the social media, the app markets, or even the call centers calls, especially the negative ones. And we know that users hate us, but we have we have to collect all those negative comments and upgrade our apps and to make it more satisfactory for the users and make the hate go away. So since CBDC, our CBDC formally launched last year, we have iterated 19 versions of our app and to satisfy the market needs. As we said, I have said that we are more market-oriented, but we cannot be more profit-oriented because some of the functions, for example, the offline function, which is actually not profitable in Chinese market, but we have to develop that function because we want to make our CBDC a universal payment instrument which could be used at 7/24 and whenever, wherever. So with the introduction of the CBDC, I would like to say that the central bank could be more user-friendly, could be more user-oriented, and we can see we share that value of connecting people. So, I mean, of course, that will be a tough job for me to attracting people here because we cannot offer the similar salary level as the private sector, but I believe that people who share our value will join us in the future.
I think that's a very fair point about the public service value. So I'm conscious of time and maybe give the final word then to Sunena. So you have been working in the private sector more recently, and your Twitter profile descriptor says you are solving gnarly problems.
For all my Canadian friends.
At the nexus of tech, finance and policy. So basically, having listened to all of this today, you listened to the conference as well, how do we merge the best of both worlds, kind of the private and the public sector? Over to you.
Yeah, you know, when I was first approached about the role about Chief Innovation Officer of the central bank, I'm like, wait a minute. First, is this a prank? Two, innovation, central banking is not like an oxymoron. But I'm so happy that my curiosity superseded my skepticism because as I leaned more and more into it, the reality, Jill, is there's actually more convergence than divergence between how the public sector and the private sector really interrogates and leans into innovation. Now, what we're optimizing for will be different. As Mr. Move rightly said, we're not optimizing for profitability, but in a way, we are optimizing for similar things like adoption, right? When I was in the private sector, you know, your growth hacking strategy or adoption strategy was a big component of product development, which is what my colleagues here have alluded to, right? So I think there is more convergence. What I might just offer is you think about where innovation really garners value-added outcomes and, you know, bold change in the private sector, and it's really the anchoring heuristic of, number one, are you solving gnarly problems? Again, forget about the technology, start with a problem statement, and really ask yourselves, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Why does this problem need to be solved? And why are we uniquely qualified to solve this problem, right? And then zone in, and therein lies your niche. And as central banks, I think sometimes we don't appreciate how powerful our scale is. I worked in the private sector in a startup. All you craved for was that scale. And for us, we have massive scale. Our challenge is kickstarting or accelerating our metabolism, right? The private sector oftentimes has speed, but we have scale. If we can just introduce more tempo and metabolism to our scale, I think the curve of the impact we can all collectively make, and I know the work that BIS Innovation Hubs are doing, it can definitely be a force multiplier. So I think there's a convergence and there's an area where we could do better. I think the other part of the heuristic is as we're all solving these gnarly problems, to something you touched on, are we obsessing about it? with the end consumer in mind, right? Whether it's an internal user, external user, retail user, institutional user, are we, because it's easy to fall in love with your solution or think that this problem you're solving for is so important, maybe it's to you. In the private sector, we often asked ourselves, are you shipping this product for 10 people, 10,000 people, 10 million people, right? You better be shipping for 10 million people because that's what's going to justify it. And I think sometimes as we're interrogating, are we really asking ourselves, who's the end user? Do they want this problem solved? And is this the way they want to solve it? And are we really coming at it with that obsession about the consumer experience? And then I think the last imperative as part of that heuristic for why innovation is critical as central bankers, which is very same as the private sector, is it's about relevancy. And Cecilia said that in her opening comments, is how are we making sure that we're leveling up our value and relevancy? So the mission-driven work that all of the institutions here do, how is that making the end user's life, again, simple, fast, easy? And just because it was a great experience 2 years ago, is it still that great experience? Because consumers can be fickle, and that's a good thing, right? Maybe I'll end with a survey, since we were doing a lot of them. Think about just in your own lifetimes how quickly expectations from a consumer perspective have changed, because ultimately that consumer is the decider. Raise your hands if in your lifetime you've received advice or given advice about do not talk to strangers. Do not get in strangers' cars. Do not ever stay in a stranger's house, right? You've either given that advice as parents or received it. And think about it, just in the last 10 years, I talked to strangers today on Twitter. I probably shouldn't, but I did. I did not get in any fights. I rode with a stranger when I when I left the airport to go to my hotel. And, I even paid them for the privilege of riding in a stranger's car. And on my last vacation, I stayed in a stranger's home, right? So it's a cheeky example, but it just illustrates that end consumer that we're serving is moving at a velocity that we have to catch up because they're not waiting for us. And I think that imperative for innovation is the same whether you're in a central banking context or in the private sector context.
Thank you very much, Sunaina. And I think wrapping around it all is the public interest, which I think each of you serve through your own organisations. So can I just thank all of our panellists, Margarita, Pablo, Cheng Chung, Sunaina, for your time. And thank you very much, everybody, for listening.